Some towns don't have much in common with the country they belong to. They develop in their own way. They can have a history more like a town on the other side of the world than one nearby. That's the case with large ports, for instance. The sea connects nations, and it's easy to explain the similarities. But some other towns don't share any mutual formal connection as a community, like Essen in Germany, Pittsburgh in the USA, Swansea in Wales, Wiese in Belgium, Petrila in Romania. They may have some hallmarks of the national and political identity of their countries, but they share one common factor in their development: coal. Coal is what predetermines their unique fate. When an open-cast coal mine opens near a town, it becomes a mining centre, and this inevitably brings certain events in its wake. A boom in infrastructural development and in the population, and a sudden increase in the standard of living. Secondary business activities begin to flourish. Pernik in Bulgaria is just such a town. The year is 1891. Only 13 years ago, Bulgaria was liberated from 5 centuries of Ottoman domination. Pernik was a village with just over 1,000 inhabitants, but rudimentary coal production had already begun in Ottoman times. After the Principality of Bulgaria was founded, the Russian Imperial Commissioner Don Duke of Korsakov advised the authorities, "Don't try to find any gold here other than black gold." There were frequent gold rushes all over the world during this century. Bulgarians tend to keep an ear to what's going on in the world. They immediately organized production at the Moshino mine and leased it out. Over 100,000 tons of coal were extracted over 15 years before the mine was closed. By now, European geologists and engineers knew that there were millions of tons of mineral resources underground. Specialists arrived from France, Germany, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Principality rushed through a Mines Act, reserving the exclusive right to carry out prospecting and extraction works in the coalfields. Already in 1892, almost 30,000 tons of coal had been extracted. By 1910, the figure had reached 230,000 tons. Private enterprise emerged. Various mines were given under concession. Residential buildings sprung up around the mines. The village centre gradually shifted from the Varosha neighbourhood to the banks of the Struma River. The main mining activities were concentrated in this area. Settlers here included not only miners themselves, but also qualified specialists. The cluster of buildings became a neighbourhood, and the neighbourhood became a village in its own right. By the end of the 1920s, the neighbourhoods of Inginerin, Tvrdi Livadi, which means hard fields, and Monte Carlo had appeared. Monte Carlo is named after the famous neighbourhood in the Principality of Monaco. Although the principalities of Bulgaria and Monaco can't be compared in terms of territory, they both had a neighbourhood called Monte Carlo. Why? Well, it's no mystery. The casino in Monaco became world famous about 10 years before the liberation of Bulgaria. Western Europeans working in Pernik demanded entertainments after a hard day's work. An enormous roulette table was brought in for them. At the time, there was nowhere to buy playing cards, even in big Bulgarian cities. People still argue about whether this was the first roulette table in Bulgaria, but what's sure is that the first electric light bulb was lit in Pernik, At a trade presentation in the USA in 1880, Thomas Edison spoke the prophetic words, "Soon only the rich will burn candles." 1895, industrialization brought electricity to Bulgaria. The first Bulgarian light bulb was lit in Pernik to meet the needs of an electricity substation for mine separation works. Amazingly, the Prince's Palace in Sofia was only electrified later. The authorities built a water supply and sewerage. Pernik looked increasingly like a proper town, while most officially declared Bulgarian towns were still in search of an identity. Apart from the mine, there was another essentially European explanation for this trend: trains. Pernik station was opened in 1893 on the Sofia-Kustendil line. The inauguration took place on a hot day in August, attended by Prince Ferdinand and the Prime Minister Stefan Stambolov. They were quite aware of the importance of this project, even though the station only had 7 staff. Decades later, the road from the station to the mines department would be littered with stalls, shops, bars and restaurants. These also contributed to the economy of the town, which Pernik still wasn't, officially. Trains were the main means of overland transport at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. If ports were the equivalent of airports in those days, railway stations combined the importance of private cars, bus stations, and of course, railway stations themselves. Enormous numbers of people and huge amounts of money and goods went by rail. The first street lighting in Bulgaria would be installed here along the road from the mines department to the engineers' neighbourhood. On the way to the stations, they built tall, ghostly structures. These were essential water stops for supplying steam locomotives with water. A special kind of infrastructure grew up around these water stops. Even railwaymen had a slang term for these odd little settlements: jerkwater towns. As industry flourished in the town, there was an increasing interest in the surrounding land. The state was quick to intervene. Specialists marked out the boundaries of the coal basin. In 1910, Parliament amended the Mines Act. The text stipulates that the entire tertiary basin shall be placed entirely at the disposal of the state. Several mines had now been opened. The whole complex was simply called the mines. This was where young Bulgarian engineers and geologists put their skills to work. Some of the most influential men in Bulgaria joined the board and the administrative council as members. But in 1913, only 3 years later, the 2 Balkan Wars broke out. The outcome was disastrous for Bulgaria. The Second Balkan War was a prelude to the First World War that began in 1914. Germany and Bulgaria were allies in the First World War, but in practice, Bulgaria was a failed state after the Second Balkan War. The Pernik Mines Company needed new funding to stay in business. This meant getting a loan, an enormous loan. The mine management decided to apply for credit from the German bank Diskonto Gesellschaft. This giant managed rail and mining projects from Russia and Japan to Cameroon and Venezuela. Shortly afterwards, it merged with Deutsche Bank, the other giant from the German Empire. Diskonto expressed an interest. This spelt nothing but trouble for the enthusiastic Bulgarians, who were inexperienced in international finance. The loan they applied for was enormous, even by European standards. In exchange, however, the Germans insisted on a share of the mine ownership. There followed 6 months of exhausting negotiations. Kaiser Wilhelm II discreetly intervened on Bulgaria's behalf. His good relations with the Bulgarian generals were the reason for taking this, at first sight, paradoxical step. In the end, Bulgarians and Germans managed the mine jointly, but its ownership remained 100% Bulgarian. About 10 years later, 1925, Pernik Mines acquired the status of an autonomous company. The enterprise was turned into a kind of organization that was completely unknown in Bulgaria. A profit-sharing scheme was introduced among the workers. The plan featured all the benefits achieved by the Western European technical intelligentsia and proletariat. 3% of the profit was set aside for maintaining the mining school, scholarships abroad, technical literature, and even for new inventions. Another 2.5% was set aside for the cultural, social, and health needs of the workers. What did this bureaucratic-sounding phrase really mean? The first colliery band in the town was established a quarter of a century earlier. In 1919, Pernik Mines founded a professional theatre. Another 10 years were to elapse before Pernik officially acquired the status of a town. It was highly unusual to have a professional theatre in a village, but in reality, Pernik had long been a town in terms of its infrastructure and atmosphere. The Moscow Art Theatre, led by the famous Konstantin Stanislavski and Vladimir Danchenko, toured Bulgaria in 1922. They performed Anton Chekhov's Uncle Vanya. The troupe only visited 2 cities, Sofia and Varna, but there was also a third performance in Pernik. From 1892 to 1926, Pernik was among the fastest growing localities in Bulgaria, growing from 1,000 to 12,000 inhabitants. No wonder. The wages were several times higher than those of many other workers, even in the capital Sofia. Apart from that, the mine employees felt part of a family that took care of each one of its members. This kind of social policy was unheard of, even in the recently proclaimed Kingdom of Bulgaria. After the town was almost completely built up in a number of urbanized neighborhoods, the mine management set out to implement a social strategy. But before that, an event took place that was significant for everyone. Pernik was officially declared a town. This was in 1929. The celebrations were attended by all leading statesmen, led by Tsar Boris III. From that moment onwards, all regimes in power kept a close eye on the fate of the town. The First World War left the economies of the warring states in difficulties. This applied especially to the losers, such as Bulgaria and Germany. They were forced to pay reparations way beyond their capacity. Major European economists and financiers tried to find ways to stop state companies from draining the national budget, and on the contrary, to start making profits. Pernik Mines was part of this trend. It remained a state-owned company, but under autonomous management and with the status of an independent judicial entity. After April 1925, instead of the planned 30 million Bulgarian levs, company turnover soared to 150 million. The government transferred the management of Bobov Dol, another mining company, to Pernik Mines. From 1928 to 1940, Bobov Dol generated a profit of 30,337,500 Bulgarian levs. It was remarkable that this happened during the Great Depression in a country that had lost the First World War. Today's center of Pernik is in the place where the center of the mining village took shape. The management at head office set up a department with 3 subdivisions: urban development, construction and building maintenance, and parks and gardens. This was not just useless administrative bureaucracy. These departments managed the construction works for an ambitious social program. They built a hospital, a health center, a church, a theater, a stadium, a swimming pool, 2 schools and kindergartens, a mining hotel, canteens, a bathhouse, a spa, a pulmonary hospital, and a holiday center near the mineral water springs at the village of Rudarci in the Vitosha mountain area. All of this was completely, or almost completely, free of charge. Ordinary miners were now paid twice the average wage for the country. Non-governmental professional associations were formed. The geographical location of the town also turned out to favour its growth. Pernik is located between three mountain ranges, only 25 kilometers from the capital city Sofia in southwest Bulgaria. The town is on an old trading route linking the Danube to the Aegean Sea and Asia Minor. Even the Romans made active use of this route, but the region has a really ancient history. The settlement has existed for over 8,000 years. It was inhabited by a Thracian tribe named Adeva, mentioned by the great ancient Greek historian Thucydides. They liked this region because of its favourable climate and mineral water springs. In medieval times, when Bulgaria had become a political factor on the European continent, Pernik fortress was built near to the town's current location. Its fame spread beyond the borders of the state during Tsar Samuil's reign. At the time, the local feudal lord Krakra gathered the courage to lead two separate battles against the Eastern Roman Empire, now known as Byzantium. The river Struma flows through Pernik. Reservoirs would later be built, which almost gave the region a coastal character. Pernik also turned out to be an attractive trading centre. Its development went way beyond just the mines. The first mechanical engineering works in Bulgaria went into operation back in 1924. Pernik was the first place in Bulgaria to produce glass. Later, the first coke factory was opened. Inhabitants of Pernik also acquired a rather special reputation and a particular sense of humour. What do two bald Pernik people do? Pull each other's hair out. Where do visitors to the town spend the night? In the casualty ward. These jokes date back to the first days of the mine, but now they're traditional. This humour is almost unique in Bulgaria, for a simple reason. Pernik jokes seem full of violence, but in fact this is to be expected. In percentage terms, this town had the greatest number of physically healthy and resilient men who risk their lives every day. It's obviously not a place for delicate and polite people. Even the first coat of arms of the mines featured two dwarfs. The story's the same from the Brothers Grimm to J.R. Tolkien. They depict dwarfs as greedy creatures living in mines and looking for wealth underground. The story of young Pernik engineers who studied abroad is in the same vein. They remade a kind of heating stove. They made it as ugly as possible to look at and self-deprecatingly called it a Pernik stove. But it turned out so effective that the government patented it and gave 2 tons of coal to anyone who bought it. However, a refined Austro-Hungarian bound his life to Pernik forever. Toma Nerliba headed the mines and taught his trade to his Bulgarian colleagues. He lived in the town with his wife and daughter. He was a cosmopolitan who adopted Bulgarian citizenship. Apart from Central Europeans, another wave of immigrants set the course of the town's development. These were the White Guards from Russia. From 1918 to the beginning of the 1920s, 3 million White Guards fled the Bolshevik Revolution, settling all over the world. They were mainly middle and upper-class Russians. About 500 of them ended up in Pernik. This was a huge influx for a town with less than 15,000 inhabitants. In percentage terms, this represented an even bigger White Guard migration than in Paris. By the 1930s, there were 5,000 of them. They too contributed their culture to the atmosphere of the town. Some of them worked in the mine. Relations between all these men from different nationalities in Pernik were unusual even for Europe. Miners, even from countries at war with each other, were ready to sacrifice themselves for the others. This is not at all surprising. The galleries are hundreds of meters underground and extend for several kilometers. In those conditions, there's nobody to rely on except yourself and the person with you. In those days, there were no telephones or radios underground. Man's only helper was the horse. They only had God to protect them. In 1919, the director of Pernik Mines took the initiative of building an Orthodox church. They named it after the most revered Bulgarian saint, Ivan Rilski. He became a monk in the Middle Ages and went to live in the highest and loneliest mountains in Bulgaria, the Rila Mountains. According to one biography, he spent most of his life fasting and praying in a cave in the rocks. The Board of Governors of the mines decided to make him the patron saint of the miners. His way of life was something like theirs. Since then, people from Pernik call this building the Mine Church. The chapel today testifies to the strong religious feelings of the mine workers. They would go to the chapel before starting their underground shift. Part of this period is now represented in a mining museum. Are you claustrophobic? If you go 10 meters into the museum, then turn around quickly looking for the way out. Then yes, you're afraid of enclosed spaces. Horses also left this place long ago. (1945). The world was not even halfway through the most fateful century for humanity, with its 2 world wars. Unexpectedly, the Kingdom of Bulgaria became a People's Republic and part of the Soviet bloc. Nationalization was rampant. Nothing was like it was before. But the socialist state retained the management model of Pernik mines. They kept their heads above water in real competition with other mining centres around the world, not just in the socialist countries of the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. Let's go back to our childhood. How did we imagine the miners? And how do we imagine them now that we're grown up? It's always the same. Sleepless men with huge pensions, hair in their ears and silicosis. In short, ruffians, doomed to their fate, their wives resigned to their circumstances. Half of this image is true to reality, but that's not all. In fact, they look like pirates, but they're underground pirates. Gentlemen of fortune in the bowels of the earth. Yes, they got money in the end. Iron ore, gold, strong in their hatred and strong in their love. They usually died young, but they knew that if you're a miner, you're different. And it was especially important to be a miner from Pernik. You could then expect kings and other leaders of the state to be always at your side. But so much for today's shift.